My name is Shamus. My last name is Koch, but I just go by Shamus. That's my artistic handle. And I'm from northeastern Wisconsin, a little mill town. Grew up very rural. I might have been 10 or 12 years old when I was paging through my mother's Life magazine, and they were doing an expose on modern art in America. And Klein was in there, and Pollock was in there, and Pablo Picasso was in there. I turned the page and I saw this image and I just gasped, and I thought, someday I'm going to make this kind of art. It's a bicycle seat and handlebars, and he hung it on the wall and called it Bull's Head, and I thought it was the most genius thing I'd ever seen. So consequently, I'm a found object artist. I've been in the Sawdust Art Show for 22 consecutive years. It's the reason I left the Midwest. It was the first week in August, and I walked in the gates of Sawdust Art Festival. I gasped and I went, oh my God, I'm home. So that's consequently, 22 years later, I'm selling my found object art and enjoying my life. One of the things I do is wire sculpture, and I call these pieces picorsos after Santo Picasso, our patron saint. And they're one piece of wire, so they start out on one foot and they go up and down, and around, and swirls and doodles. And then when I get to the head, that's when I pay a lot of attention, because that's what makes them read horse. So, and I call them picorsos after, like I said, Picasso. My materials all came from out of Wisconsin, because I didn't know of any scrap yards. When I would be back in the Midwest visiting my mom and dad, I'd go to old farmers and knock on their door, because every old farm had a big scrap metal pile that they were either going to turn in for money or cannibalize to repair the baler, you know. And I'd pay the farmer like 20 bucks to go through their scrap metal, and that's where I'd find abundant pitchforks and things like that. I got tons of metal. I got about, I'm guessing, between 8 and 10 tons of metal in California and 25 to 30 tons on my dad's property in Wisconsin. So I'll be able to weld the rest of my life, I figure. One of the things I'm most proud of is my rebar trees. These are a relatively new art form that I came up with. This is a mantle tree. I can make a tree to fit on any mantle. I've also done 8-foot tall trees and smaller versions. The reason I fell into a rebar tree is somebody gave me some scrap rebar, and I looked at it and I thought it looks like tree bark, and that was the source of inspiration. A lot of times it's when I find a particular piece of metal that'll spawn the idea, and sometimes spawning a whole series. With the roosters, going back to the old farms, I went and cleaned off a farm that a friend of mine's father had passed away, and he never threw away a pitchfork. So I went there and I gathered probably 50 to 60 pitchforks, and I was carrying them around. These were back on my dad's land, and I had to move them a couple times, and I kept asking myself, what are you going to do with pitchforks? What are you going to do with pitchforks? And one day I picked up 3 or 4, and I looked at them and I went, oh my God, they're a rooster tail. So now I'm always on the hunt for pitchforks. But once I got the inspiration for the idea, it was a no-brainer to come up with rakes for wings and a saw blade for a comb and chain for a wattle. All that stuff is like second nature. Another thing that happens when I find one particular piece of metal and I pick it up, and I know I've got like 3 or 4 different pieces of metal that are going to be part of the sculpture, I can see that finished sculpture in my third eye. It's like it just kind of does a tick, 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 and I know exactly how it's going to go together. When I'd be shopping at the scrapyard before there was cell phones where you could take a picture, I'd travel with a little box camera, and I'd find 2 or 3 pieces of metal, and I'd be carrying them walking through the scrapyard, and the relationship would form. So I'd lay them on the ground as close to possible as what the finished sculpture was going to look like and take a picture of it. Because after I got the piece to my dad's property, then built a crate and shipped it to California, and then unloaded it into my backyard, a lot of that creative spark would get muddled or lost. So I'd have a photo record of the inspiration. So one of the things I do is I teach a rudimentary welding class in my backyard here in Laguna Beach. I work with a 220 stick arc welder. That's the welder I learned how to weld on in 8th grade in industrial arts. In my class, we practice on scrap metal until you get the technique down. Then everybody in class makes a Firefly, which is something I've been selling in my booth for maybe 15, 20 years now. So the work you see here will be available at my studio. And so if you feel free to call me and stop by and buy some art. Thank you. So I'm going to demonstrate how to make a Firefly out of a spark plug. So this is a stick arc welder. This is a welding rod. This is the negative. This is the positive. So I get the welding rod and let's see if it's grounded. Okay, it's grounded, so we're ready to rock and roll here. So when I teach this class in my backyard, I jokingly call this a hot glue gun for metal, because basically that's all it is in our hands. Welding can be very, very complicated, especially if you're welding aluminum or stainless steel. You get into inert gases blowing on the weld. But this, like I say, is basically a hot glue gun for metal. So with my welding class, everybody makes 3 of these actually. The first couple don't turn out so well. By the 3rd time they got it down.